Young women have been growing up with an indoctrination of what womanhood is and what it should be. They've been taught everything that is in direct opposition to the Word of God. Young women who want to be different from the world are rare, but they are real. Join Audrey, often alongside her daughter Graciana and daughters-in-law Kesed and Maureen, who desire to be discerning in a day when everything seems to go against God's design. And now, here's Audrey.
Hey there. This podcast has kind of taken on a life of its own in so many different ways. And I'm so grateful for the way God has been growing me through it and stretching me and helping me to make it happen. And I'm grateful for the people in my life that help me, like Corbin and his wife Kayla. In fact, his wife Kayla is the voice you hear now on the intro and the outro, and I love that family so much. I'm so grateful for the way the Lord has brought them to our church and who make so many things happen, and all the new things you've seen, even with the video podcast part. That is thanks to Corbin. I don't know how to make things like that happen. I can turn on the camera and I can go for it, but I am so grateful that he leaves me a list of what I am to do. So, and I don't know when this episode will drop, but I even recorded a video podcast with his instructions last week. So we'll see how that goes. But right now I'm just in the studio and this is just an audio recording. And when I said a minute ago how this podcast has kind of taken on a life of its own, I kind of was dividing it into the Tuesday drop to be, just something that's good to discuss. I want to do some more things like, the topic of overthinking. I want to do the topic of praying for your children and what that looks like. And I want to get my girls on here. I want to get Kesed and Graciana and Maureen on here more. And I hope to do that to address some of these things. And when I had Audrey, Kate, and Ruth in here and we recorded the podcast with them, I told them that I wanted to do one on overthinking because I've been asked some questions about that. And how do you discern the difference between you're overthinking something and just thinking about it on your own, and whether you're being deliberate in really thinking wisely about something. And they both said, oh, we would love to do that one with you. So I think we'll get to that eventually. But as talking about this podcast kind of taking on a life of its own, I told my girls that I have so much content because of hearing from you all, which I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to hear from you all and the things that you're asking. And so the podcast really could be, instead of the Friday edition being real questions, real answers, it could just be the whole thing. The topics are based on your questions. Then there are the questions that you ask. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead with a question that I received and I'm going to address it today and we'll see how this goes. But this is the question. Hey, Audrey, I'm looking for advice from a veteran grandmothers with kids that live in another city. How do you grandparent from afar, especially the first week or two? Do you leave home as soon as mom goes to the hospital? And then she said, did you leave home as soon as mom went to the hospital? Did you stay with the new family? How long do you stay? What did you do? Any advice is welcome. That's a great question. And I don't know that I've ever been asked that so specifically. So I'm just going to share some things from my perspective because I've been a grandmother for 20 years now. My oldest grandchild is 20. And so it was new territory for me. And I've learned some things along the way, and I'm still learning some things. Just like when you become a mom, you've learned some things, but you're learning. And even when I, in my early years, when I was in my 30s, and I put together my first Mothering from the Heart Biblical Mothering Bible study, because young moms when I say young moms, I was a young mom in my 30s, but I'm talking about young moms in their 20s. They were looking at me as an older mom and they wanted to know what I was doing. They wanted me to teach a Bible study on mothering. And so I just put together what I was learning and what I've often said I was hanging on to for dear life, because it wasn't so much me telling them what they should be doing as moms, but me saying, this is what I'm holding on to from God's word. And this is what God's word says. And this is what I am praying for and hoping for with my own family. But talking about being a grandparent, I do think that one of the hardest parts about being a grandmother, especially when you don't live in the same area, is knowing that your heart is all over the place. Your heart can be in so many different cities where your children and grandchildren are. That's where it is. Your heart obviously is where God has planted you, but your heart is in so many different places. I mean, part of my heart is in Cheverly, Maryland. Another part is in Marietta, Georgia. Another is in Raleigh, North Carolina. Another one is in Newport, Rhode Island. And another one right now, because my youngest son and his wife and little family are traveling across the country because they're going all the way to San Diego. He's captain of the Marine Corps, and they're moving there. So my heart's all over the place, and it moves all over the place as my children move. So I understand what you're thinking, and I understand that feeling so well. But one thing I learned early on, and in fact, as I will often say, I'm still learning, because you never arrive until God takes you home. You don't know fully. You know you're learning and God's teaching you and you're holding on to His word for dear life. But one of the things that I learned early on and that I wanted to be true early on and that I'm still learning is that I always wanted my children to know that I am always available to help them, that I am available to them, that I'm always available to them, that, you just call out my name and I'll come running wherever I am if I can. I'll put aside other things to be with my children if they need me. If they ask me to come, I'll be there unless for some reason I cannot be there. I always wanted them to know, always ask, because I'll move things around to make it so that I can help you or that I can be there when you want me to be there, if I can. But having said that, I never wanted either to be intrusive in their lives. I would say things like this, and I said this early on, even before they had children. I said it to my daughters-in-law. I remember it specifically saying it to my daughters-in-law. I want to be as involved as you want me to be. You tell me what would be most helpful. And I know sometimes that's hard, because you can say to someone, let me know what I can do to help. And they're like, I don't know what I need you to do to help. Just help. So I understand that too. But at the same time, as a mother-in-law, you know that sometimes you can push through and it wasn't helpful, or they didn't want you to do something. So it's, you want to be helpful. And so I did tell them, I want you to tell me, and I would truly follow their lead. Now, sometimes over the years, I have held back when I wanted to push through. I wanted to just lean in and do what I wanted to do. Other times, I did what I wanted to do, and I pushed through when, in hindsight, I should have held back a little bit. It's a learning process. It just is, and we don't always know. That's why it's like, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, even in grandparenting, acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. All of it's a learning process. And assuming that your adult children are believers, as mine are, adult children want to be sensitive to you as well. And when I say sensitive, I'm not talking about being overly sensitive. I just mean they struggle sometimes with whether or not they're being too demanding, or whether they're asking too much. And on the other hand, sometimes they don't know if they're letting you know what they truly need. And sometimes they hold back. And so again, it's a learning process. Sometimes they don't ask us to do things because they think it's too much for us. I know sometimes your adult kids will talk to each other, with their siblings, and they don't always tell mom what they want to tell her because they're trying to protect her feelings or protect her heart or whatever the case may be. But it's so different when you have adult children than it is when they are growing up in your home. It just is. I mean, it's just different. And some women, have been talking to me lately. It's interesting because they've been expressing things to me who are in my season of life where they have adult children. And some of them have expressed to me that they feel kind of sad over not understanding or knowing what their role should be in their adult children's lives. And of course, I understand that. In fact, I will probably address that very soon, because that is the life stage I'm in. And because I'm in that life stage, a lot of other women who are beginning that life stage are or who are already in it, they are asking me about it. The same kind of, it feels kind of the way it did when I was a younger mom that I expressed early on when I was in my 30s, and the women who were maybe 10 years behind me saying, what are you doing? Will you teach a Bible study on this? Will you talk to us about this? I feel it kind of in the same way as now older women are navigating a new phase of mothering, because, when you have little children, you fix everything. They need you in so many different ways, but all of that shifts, and it should shift. And then we're, as older women and older mothers, we never stop momming. We never stop worrying. And I mean that in the right sense. We never stop thinking about our children and praying for our children. But sometimes we wonder how much we should share with them, how much we should text them, how much we should, should you fill in the blank. But getting back to this question in terms of welcoming a new baby, every family is different. Some moms desperately want their own mother there for a couple of weeks. They just do. They feel secure in that, especially if it's a first baby. They just feel secure and they don't really know what they're doing. I know I didn't. I know it's like, this baby is dependent on me for everything. And I was talking to my daughter-in-law, Diana, recently when I was with her, and I was expressing how, when I had Jeremy, all the little sounds that they make, and little things that they do, and it's new to you and you don't know what that means. And it's you're learning that. And then by the time you have your second baby, you're a little more familiar with that. But I know for me, having my mom there in the beginning, when I first brought Jeremy home from the hospital, was very, what's the word I'm looking for? It made me more confident because I knew she was experienced. She had had 4 babies. I knew that she had taken care of us. I knew that she understood those sounds and those noises. And so it helped me sleep and take a nap if I needed to, or it helped me sleep sometimes when she would be holding Jeremy and helping me with that. So I appreciated that. And so that was for me. I wanted my mom there early on to stay with us and to help me with my newborn babies. And I'm so grateful that she set aside time in her own life and schedule to do that. I know she did that with my sister as well. Now, other moms, and there's nothing, and neither one of these says anything about whether or not your daughter or your daughters-in-law love you. But some appreciate a shorter visit so they can settle into their own routines. And that's okay too. It doesn't mean that they don't want you or need you. It just means that they want to establish things. Some moms want help with laundry. They want help with meals and tasks, household tasks and their other children, if they have other children. And other moms just want quiet. And I think, just from my experience, is just that one of the greatest gifts we can give our adult children is the freedom to tell us what they need or want from us without them feeling guilty about it. And seriously, I would rather have my daughter and my daughters-in-law, and of course that includes my sons and my son-in-law, to tell me what they want from me rather than me wondering all the time, should I do this? Should I not do this? Am I being too intrusive? Am I, being here too much? Is it better if I get out of the house? Just things like that. And sometimes it is hard as a mother-in-law or even as a mom to discern those things, to know those things. And that's why I've always told my kids, and when I say my kids, I'm including my kids and my in-law kids, that I don't want to be doing something that's quietly aggravating you. That you won't say anything about, but I'm aggravating you. And I don't know I'm aggravating you. I don't know that. Because if there's something that I'm doing that is annoying to them, I'll stop. Even if I think it's stupid, and I'm not saying I do, but I'm just saying I want to be helpful. I don't want to be aggravating. I don't want to be annoying to them. I want to be what they need. Now, when our children had babies, I did try, practically speaking, to do the things that actually lighten their load. Now, and I'll see if I can separate this out a little bit. I wasn't there to hold the baby all day while mom did the housework, unless, of course, that's what the mom wanted me to do. I have moms in my family. When I say that, I'm talking about my girls who love for me to hold their baby because they want to get a few things done that they wanted to do or the way they wanted to do it. Even though it was a long time ago, I'll talk about my own mother. I can still remember when my mom was at my house. I loved it when she would hold my babies because, number one, she knew how to soothe them. And then it would give me a minute. Just give me a minute. I don't know, to maybe put on my makeup or brush my hair or mop the floor if I wanted to mop the floor. And so I let her know what was most helpful to me and to do what was most helpful to me. And with that said, I also appreciated it when she did some of the housework while I nursed the baby, because I did breastfeed all my children and she couldn't do that, of course. Or while I, took a nap with my baby. And she would do those things for me too. I appreciated that. I just so appreciated that. And both are good things. And as I think on it now, because this question came, I think about all the times my mom came when I had my babies, and she and my dad came every single time. And my mom, worked outside the home. She still had her nursing career, but she would put that on hold and come and help. And I remember I had 5 C-sections, and I can remember when I was in the hospital, when they were getting me ready with my 4th child, Grant, and all my older 3 children could be in the room with us, and my mom and dad were in there, and I'm talking about before I went into surgery. And I remember my mom brought, her cinnamon sourdough bread, and I remember in that family room, she was giving that to my kids, and I just remember it so well. Sitting in that bed as they were monitoring baby Grant, and then seeing my mom and my dad. My dad was reading some books to the children, and my mom had the cinnamon bread. And I also remember my son Jordan, who was, I remember looking over at him, and he was over there reading a Dr. Seuss book. He had just learned to read. I'd been reading to him all summer, as Jeremy was taking swimming lessons, and we would take a bag of books, and I would read to him. And then I remember, and I would point out all the letters to him. And I remember in that hospital room with baby, getting ready to welcome new baby Grant into our lives, seeing Jordan over there reading the book himself. But just thinking about my mom and dad being there and just the moment that happened, in there. And it was just a wonderful privilege for her to be there. And it was a wonderful privilege for them to be in the hospital. I felt very comforted and very loved there, especially because, that pregnancy with Grant, it was after, I had such a difficult pregnancy with my daughter, which I've shared some on this podcast before, and others of you who've listened to me for a while, know about it, because the placenta ruptured when I was 20 weeks along, right after we moved to Texas, and I was on bed rest, and it was just a very hard pregnancy. Although she was perfect, she was premature, but she was perfect, and God's grace was so sufficient for me. But after that, I remember when I got pregnant with Grant, being very, very afraid, and of course, the pregnancy with him ended up being the best one I ever had. I wasn't sick at all. I had tons of energy. It was just so good. And I remember that moment being in that hospital with all my family there, including my parents. It was just one of those times where God just wrapped me. I don't even know how to explain it, but I kind of went on a rabbit trail there. But it just reminded me of the good that your mom or your mother-in-law can do that can help you and bring you great comfort. And so, and again, when I was talking about my mom and she would do housework for me, I also remember, with my children, when I went to them, I wanted to be like that. And I remember times I wanted to wash the clothes. In fact, I enjoy doing laundry. I enjoy doing our laundry, even though at times when my kids were growing up, it was like the laundry that never ended, but I still like doing it if I could sort through it all. I enjoy cleaning my kitchen. I enjoy making food for people. I wanted to do those things for my children if they needed me to do them. And not every woman loves all that stuff, and that's okay. We're all different. But if I could run errands for them, if I could fix meals for them, if I could intercept when people were bringing meals and so that mom could rest and didn't have to talk if she didn't have the energy to talk with people who came over. I remember my mom doing that for me too. Sometimes when people would bring meals and I just didn't have the energy, especially after a C-section, to talk to someone, and my mom would talk to them for me and I didn't even have to come out. And that didn't mean that I wasn't grateful and didn't want to be with my friends. It was just in the moment. But anything that you can do to make life a little bit easier during the transition time, and so, if my children, adult children, wanted me to hold and soothe their babies, my grandchildren, while they took a shower or they took a nap or they just had a minute, I considered it a privilege to be able to do that. Now, with the exception of Audrey Kate, I have lived far away from all of my grandchildren. And when I say that about Audrey Kate, my daughter and son-in-law lived here for 2 years, and during that 2 years, when they lived in Beaufort, Audrey Kate was born, and I took that in. I loved it so much. So, but with that exception, I've lived far away from all of my children and all of my grandchildren. And so I had to be very creative to work out times to be there and to also follow their lead when they needed me to come or when they needed me not to come, and not to be offended if they're like, no, this isn't a good time. Don't come right now. That's happened with me as well when I would throw out a time, hey, I'd like to come during this time. Is that a good time? And it's like, no, that's not a good time. I don't need to be offended about that, and then other times when they want me to come, then, I'm going to do everything within my power to be there. So to follow their lead when they need me out of the house or when they need me to come or when they don't need me to come, or even sometimes when I am there and they need me to take the older children out of the house if they have older children. And when I wasn't there, and I know I already said this, but I'll say it again, I wanted them to know that they could call me anytime, day or night. With my earliest grandchildren, there was no FaceTime, but now there is, and it's become one of the sweetest gifts for long-distance grandparents. It really is. I've read stories over FaceTime to my grandchildren. I've recorded little videos singing and telling them stories. And I love watching my littlest grandchildren, I'm talking about now, present tense, show me a new toy or take wobbly steps. And I remember one time I was FaceTiming with Mary Frances, and she, so she's holding me on the phone, and I'm going down her little indoor slide with her. And then sometimes she would take the phone and have that go down the slide and go, wee, because she's like, it's like Emma's going down the slide. And then she put me in a little shopping basket, and she was taking me shopping with her. I love stuff like that. It's so good, and it's not the same as being there, but it's far better than nothing. It's so great. And even my daughter-in-law, Marilyn, sometimes when I FaceTime with Mary Frances, she would take her phone and she'd put it up on the TV, and then then I could see Mary Frances in the room, and she'd be like, Emma, Emma, Emma. And it was, I don't know, it's just really great. You think about how your children connect with, I don't know, people, okay, I'll just throw out Mr. Rogers, and they feel like they know him because they've seen him on the screen. It's the same thing that can happen with you as a grandmother. So, use it to your advantage, because it's amazing how much your grandchildren can get to know you that way. Really, it's so amazing. And of course, as they grow, I've always liked to send little surprises in the mail. And then when my older grandchildren got, their phones, I could send them little gifts, even with their phone, whether it's, a Circe gift and, just because, I think about it, our little surprises in the mail. And this summer we had a family time with almost all of our children and grandchildren, and all of our children. A couple of the spouses couldn't come. But I told my grandchildren who were there, even my older grandchildren, that I want to be way more intentional about sending letters to them. old-fashioned handwritten letters. And I told them sometimes I might write a long letter, or sometimes it might just be a very short note that I'm thinking about them and praying for them. And I thought about this a lot lately because my grandmother did that. And I think about it a lot more because I have entered a new stage of my life. I'm in my 60s. Both my parents are gone. My husband's parents are gone. And, as my son said recently when I was with him, and you're next. Yeah, because you're at the top now. We're the next ones. And I don't know how much time the Lord will give me, but at the same time, I want to be intentional in terms of my relationship with my grandchildren. And I can't always be with them, but I can send letters. And my grandmother did that. She intentionally wrote letters. So getting back to Grandparenting from Afar, mail or order a favorite book or some other little gift. And I mentioned Circe gift a minute ago. You know what Circe gifts are? They're just little just because gifts. It's like a Southern thing that you just saw something and it reminded you of this particular grandchild. And don't worry about quote unquote favoritism. You love all your grandchildren equally, and God will bring all of them to mind at different times. And so, this something reminded you of this grandchild. And so send it. Don't hold back for that. Hold back if you think of them. As Proverbs says, when it's in your hand to do it, do it. I'm probably quoting that wrong, but I will, in fact, I'll look it up and get that to you. I love that because if you think of something, tell the person. If something reminds you, do it. Just because you thought of them, something reminded you of them. And I do that for my children as well. Something that just reminds me of them, and I just want to do it. I just want to send it. I just want to order it. But with your little ones, and I already said this, but I'll say it again, let them hear your voice often enough that they know it. Because you know what? A relationship is not just one big moment that happens. It's lots of moments. It's lots of little moments over the course of time. And, if you've listened to me for any length of time, you've heard me say something like this, that one of the greatest sadnesses of my life is living so far away from my children and grandchildren. But at the same time, I cannot dwell on that because I need to be content with the portion that God has given me. And this is what He has given me. We raised our children, and I'm talking about Carl and me, to be independent, to make it on their own, to have their own walk with God, to make their own decisions, to be committed to their own families. And every single one of them has moved away from where they grew up. And this is the way it should be, unless the Lord obviously called them to live in the same, because there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with living in the same town and place as your parents, if that's what God has for you. But that's not what God had for me either. I grew up, I married Carl, and I didn't live near my parents. I've never lived, the closest I ever lived to my parents was 2 hours away. And it's whatever God has called us to. And God has called all of my children to serve Him in different areas of the country, in different spheres. And they are raising their families in different places, and that's okay. In fact, that's good because that's God's will for them. And I have learned to accept that, to take what God has given me and accept it and make the most of it. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean that I deny the feelings that I have about it, that I can't just go to every, thing they're in and be at everything that they're in. Yeah, I have real hard feelings, sad feelings about that sometimes, but I can't live by those feelings. I have to think the way I've often counseled women to think. I don't have this, but I have this. I also think it's important to remember that your son and daughter-in-law, or your daughter and son-in-law, whatever it is, they are becoming their own family. This is their season for them to establish their rhythms and their traditions and their routines. We don't have to be, as their parents, as our children's parents, the center of everything. to have a deeply meaningful relationship with them or with our grandchildren. And sometimes loving our children and grandchildren well means giving them room to grow. And it also means quietly standing by, ready to help whenever we're needed, but knowing that we can't do everything and knowing that we still are important to them. I mean, think of Jesus. I mean, think about Jesus and his mother. Remember when they came and said, your mother and your brothers are out there. In fact, I'm going to look that up real quick because I didn't have it. It just came to my mind just now as I'm talking about this. But I want to look that verse up because, Mary, as important as she was in Jesus's life, and we know that when you go to her Magnificat, we know when the angel appeared to her, we know how important she was in his life. We know that. But when he became an adult, that shifted and she was in the background. Let's see if I can pull it up here. Yeah, it's in Matthew 12, verses 46 to 50. Let me see. Let me go to that. And it says, while he was still speaking to the crowds, talking about Jesus, behold, his mother and brothers were standing outside seeking to speak to him. Someone said to him, behold, your mother and your brothers are standing outside seeking to speak to you. But Jesus answered the one who was telling him and said, who is my mother and who are my brothers? And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, behold, my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven, he is my brother and my sister and my mother. And, he wasn't discounting the fact that she was his mother. We know how much he loved his mother. We know that throughout how he continued in obedience to them. We know that from what the scriptures do tell us. And we also know that because when she was at the cross, he told John to take care of her. And so we know that. We know that she was important even when he was an adult child of hers. But we also know that she stood quietly by. We know that from what the scriptures tell us, and she accepted that. So, all of this, is a learning process, and we have to know that, and we have to accept it. Now, let me see if I can go back to where I was since I took that little detour to read that passage to you. So I guess I'll get back to some, practical advice. My practical advice would be, something like this. As I've already said, make your availability known to your children, but don't place unrealistic expectations on your children. Just tell them things like, I'm here. I will do anything I can to help. I will. And there are times when they might not know what they need, but you, as you walk with the Lord, you will sense something, and then you just lean in and you do it. And tell them too, if you're leaning in too much, they can tell you to back off and then joyfully follow what they tell you. I'm still learning, even though I've been a grandmother for 20 years. I always, though, want to communicate love to my children, respect for them as adults, and confidence in them as parents. I have found that when my adult children, believe me, and when they know I'm not trying to take over, I find great joy in that when I know that about them. And I love it when they invite me into their lives. I love that. And sometimes it's very hard as a grandparent knowing when to just do what you want to do and when to follow their lead. And as I've said many times in this podcast, it's a journey. So I guess to sum the whole thing up, I'll just say grandparenting from a distance requires seeking God. But it can still be a rich time, it can be a joyful time, and it can also be a deeply connected time. Miles might separate you, as it does me, from my grandchildren and my children, but it does not erase the love and the connection. We just have to be a little bit more intentional about how to show that and ask the Lord how we can show that effectively.
Catch Audrey and her daughter Grace Anna live at Share the Arrows, a women's-only conference hosted by Allie Beth Stuckey. Grab your tickets now at sharethearrows.com. If you enjoyed this episode of Rare But Real, share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Follow Audrey on Instagram and Facebook at Rare But Real. And listen to all her messages on the Rare But Real app.